The Chinese executives were visibly impressed as the young triplets commanded the room with perfect Mandarin, professionally translating complex financial terms while the CEO watched in disbelief until their mother walked in and the CEO's face transformed from gratitude to absolute shock as he recognized her from 8 years ago. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. Now subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The snow fell mercilessly over Boston on that December evening in 2008, coating the elegant brownstones of Beacon Hill in a pristine white blanket. Elena Vasquez shivered inside the elevator of the luxury building, but not from the cold that had seeped through her worn wool coat. Her trembling came from somewhere deeper as she rehearsed the words she'd spent weeks crafting. 6 months, she whispered to herself, one hand unconsciously moving to the small swell of her belly, hidden beneath layers of winter clothing. I'm 6 months pregnant with your child. The elevator doors opened to the penthouse floor with a soft chime. Elena took a deep breath, straightening her shoulders before walking the short distance to apartment 1201. She had been here countless times over the past year, but tonight felt different. Tonight would change everything. William Ainsworth opened the door before she could knock, his tall frame silhouetted against the warm light of his apartment. At 32, he embodied old Boston money, Harvard Business School, third-generation wealth management, weekend sailing in Nantucket. His blue eyes, usually warm when they looked at her, now held a coolness that made Elena's heart stutter. "You're late," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." The apartment sprawled before her, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a spectacular view of the Charles River and the city lights beyond. Elena had once found it magical. Now it felt like the setting for an execution. "I needed time to think," she replied, declining his offer to take her coat. She wasn't staying long. William walked to the bar cart by the windows and poured himself a bourbon. "Drink?" he offered, not looking at her. "No, thank you." Elena remained standing, one hand still protectively cradling her stomach. "William, we need to talk." He turned, leaning against the window, Boston's skyline glittering behind him like a backdrop designed to emphasize his position in the world. "About your visa situation? I told you my father's friend at immigration might be able to help, but I'm pregnant," Elena interrupted, the words tumbling out before she lost her courage. 6 months. The bourbon glass stopped halfway to his lips. William's expression shifted from surprise to calculation in seconds, his eyes dropping to her midsection, now seeing what he'd failed to notice in recent weeks. "You have certainty?" he asked, his voice controlled despite the fury building in his eyes. 6 months? Elena nodded, fighting the urge to wrap both arms around her belly. "Yes. That's impossible. You've been on birth control." "It failed." Elena's voice was steady despite her racing heart. "These things happen." William drained his glass in one swallow, then turned to pour another. His back to her, he asked, "And you're certain it's mine?" The question sliced through Elena like a knife. In the 15 months since they'd met at that Harvard Business School fundraiser, she had never given him reason to doubt her. She, with her linguistics fellowship at MIT, her perfect academic record from Universidad Nacional Autónoma de Mexico, had been so proud when the handsome, wealthy American had shown interest in her. "How can you ask me that?" Her voice trembled now. William turned back, his expression hardening. "This isn't about trust, Elena. It's about being practical. This," he gestured vaguely toward her midsection, "was not in our plans." "It wasn't planned, no," Elena agreed. "But it's happening. I thought you had the right to know." William walked to the massive windows, staring out at the city as snowflakes swirled against the glass. "I'm being considered for executive director of acquisitions. The board is grooming me to succeed my father in 5 years." He spoke as if reciting facts for a business case. "A family isn't in my plans for this decade, Elena, especially not with someone Like you." The words hung in the air between them. "Someone like me?" Elena repeated, disbelief creeping into her voice. William sighed, turning to face her with the patient expression one might use with a child who couldn't grasp a simple concept. "Be realistic. An immigrant on a student visa, no green card, no influential family, no connections. What did you expect? That I'd introduce you at the Brookline Country Club? That my parents would make an exception for you at Thanksgiving dinner?" He laughed, a cruel sound she'd never heard from him before. "It was fun while it lasted, but I've always been clear that this was temporary." Elena felt the floor tilt beneath her. In all their time together, William had never spoken to her this way. There had been no clarity about their relationship being temporary. There had been weekend trips to Vermont, late-night conversations about philosophy and literature, passionate encounters in this very apartment where he'd whispered words that felt like promises. "I didn't come here to trap you," Elena said quietly. "I came because I thought you deserved to know." William walked to his desk and pulled open a drawer. He withdrew a checkbook and began writing. "How much do you need to resolve this discreetly? 50,000? 100,000? "Resolve this?" Elena whispered, unable to believe what she was hearing. "You know very well there are clinics. Discreet, safe ones. Afterward, we can discuss an additional amount for you to restart your life, in another state, preferably." The nausea that rose in Elena's throat had nothing to do with her pregnancy. "I didn't come here for money." William exhaled sharply, as if dealing with a stubborn child. "A pregnant immigrant doesn't fit into my expansion plans for Wall Street. You're a burden I don't intend to carry." The words hit Elena like physical blows. William continued, relentless, "Take this check and disappear. I'd rather pay to never have to look at your face again than risk my reputation with a family unsuitable for someone in my position." Elena stood frozen, unable to process the transformation of the man she thought she knew. The check lay on the coffee table between them, an insult disguised as generosity. "You're a smart girl, Elena," William continued, his voice softening slightly. "Use that intelligence now. Do you really think you can raise a child alone in this country? No family, no green card, with a visa about to expire? Be practical." Elena found her voice at last. "I'm not asking you for anything, William. I'm telling you that in 3 months, you will have a child in this world. What you do with that information is your choice. And I've made my choice clear." He gestured to the check. "Take it. Do what needs to be done." With trembling fingers, Elena picked up the check. William's signature was missing. He wanted to ensure she'd use it for its intended purpose before signing. She folded it once, twice, then tore it cleanly down the middle, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "Goodbye, William." Hours later, Elena walked through Boston's frozen streets, pulling a single suitcase behind her. The torn check, unsigned and crumpled, remained in her pocket, a reminder of what she would never accept. Her shared apartment with other students was no longer an option. The news of her pregnancy had created an unbearable environment. Her fellowship program was compromised. Her visa would expire in weeks. The snow fell harder now, clinging to her eyelashes and melting on her cheeks, indistinguishable from her tears. She had $712 in her bank account, a half-completed master's degree, and a baby growing inside her. No family in America, no safety net, no plan. In the following weeks, Elena faced the brutal reality of her situation. She slept in a women's shelter in South End, taking small translation jobs and giving private Spanish lessons to pay for prenatal checkups at a community clinic. At one of these appointments, she received news that made her already desperate situation even more daunting. "Triplets?" Elena repeated, staring at the ultrasound screen in disbelief. "It's extremely rare, but it happens," explained the doctor gently, "especially in cases of in vitro fertilization." Elena laughed bitterly. No reproductive technology, just fate with its perverse sense of humor. Boston's winter was relentless. but no more so than the determination beginning to grow within her. On a particularly frigid night, after standing all day serving coffee with a 7-month pregnant belly, Elena made a decision. She sat at her small table in the shelter and wrote a letter to Li Chen, a visiting professor from Beijing University whom she'd met during her now-aborted master's program. Professor Chen had been impressed with her fluency in 4 languages and had offered a position in his linguistic consulting firm. 3 weeks later, now in New York, Elena received his response. A remote translator contract, a small advance payment, and most importantly, sponsorship for her work visa. It wasn't much, but it was a beginning. "I'll prove he was wrong," she whispered to the babies in her belly as she signed the contract. About everything. While the bus left Boston behind, Elena couldn't imagine that 15 years later she would be commanding a $223 million empire, and that William Ainsworth would be begging for her attention in the lobby of the Waldorf Astoria. The frozen streets of New York City greeted Elena with indifference as she stepped off the bus at Port Authority, one hand steadying her enormous belly, the other clutching her single suitcase. The January wind cut through her inadequate coat, making the promise of Boston's cruelty seem almost quaint by comparison. But in her pocket lay Li Chen's letter, the weight of possibility heavier than the triplets shifting within her. A tiny room in Queens awaited her, secured through a network of Spanish-speaking immigrants she'd connected with online. The contrast between this 12 by 14-foot space and William's panoramic Beacon Hill apartment struck her physically as she set down her suitcase. No floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Charles River here, just a single grimy pane facing a brick wall. No designer furniture, just a sagging twin bed and a desk that wobbled on uneven legs. "This is home now," Elena whispered to her unborn children, patting her belly gently. "I'm sorry it's not what you deserve, but we'll make it better. I promise." That night, Elena set up her laptop, the one possession she'd refused to pawn in Boston, and began her first translation assignment for Li Chen's company. Medical documents dense with terminology she had to research constantly. She worked until 3 in the morning, her back screaming in protest, her belly so large now that she could barely reach the keyboard. 2 weeks later, the contractions began. 3 months too early. "No, no, no!" Elena gasped, clutching her stomach as pain ripped through her. "It's too soon." She fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking fingers, terrified that everything she'd fought for was about to collapse. The emergency room was a blur of harsh lights and urgent voices. "Triplets, 27 weeks, premature labor, steroid shots for lung development." Elena caught fragments of medical jargon as they wheeled her into surgery, her consciousness fading under anesthesia, her last thought a desperate prayer for her babies. She woke in the ICU, the steady beep of monitors her first anchor to reality. Before she could form words, she was asking with her eyes, her hands clutching at the nurse who appeared above her. "Your babies are alive," the nurse said, understanding the unspoken question. "They're very small, but they're fighters. 3 boys. 2 boys and a girl," Elena corrected weakly, somehow certain. "The third one is a girl." The nurse checked her chart. "You're right, I'm sorry. 2 boys and a girl." Elena didn't see her children for 2 days, her own recovery complicated by blood loss and infection. When she was finally wheeled into the NICU, the sight of 3 impossibly tiny bodies in separate incubators, surrounded by wires and tubes, broke something inside her that William's cruelty had left intact. "Michael," she whispered, touching the first incubator with trembling fingers. "Marcus." Her hand moved to the second. "And May, the third, the smallest, her daughter. I will do anything, anything, to give you the life you deserve." 17 days later, against medical advice, Elena checked herself out of the hospital. She couldn't afford to stay longer, even with emergency Medicaid covering the bulk of the astronomical costs. The babies would remain in the NICU for at least 2 more months. Back in her Queens room, Elena set up a relentless schedule, translating documents from 6 in the morning until 9, then taking the subway to the hospital to spend 3 hours with the babies, learning to feed them through tubes, to change diapers smaller than her hand, to provide the skin-to-skin contact the nurses insisted was crucial. Back to Queens by 2, more translation work until 7, then another hospital visit until 10 at night. Sleep for 5 hours. Repeat. Each time she entered the NICU, the nurses updated her on her children's progress, using terminology that became her new language: bradycardia episodes, gavage feeding, kangaroo care, desaturation events. She absorbed it all, becoming an expert in premature infant development even as she maintained her translation deadlines. When the day finally came, 11 weeks after their birth, to bring her babies home, Elena had transformed her tiny room into a nursery. 3 second-hand bassinets lined one wall. A changing table made from a repurposed dresser stood opposite. Formula, diapers, and tiny clothes, all donated by hospital staff moved by her determination, were organized with military precision. Reality hit hard that first night. Alone with 3 newborns, each weighing barely 5 pounds, Elena faced the impossible mathematics of infant care. When Michael cried for feeding, Marcus and May inevitably woke. When she finally got May back to sleep, Michael needed changing. The cycle was relentless, allowing her maybe 20 consecutive minutes of sleep at a time. Translation deadlines still loomed. Elena learned to type with one hand while holding a baby with the other, a nursing pillow supporting a second infant at her breast, the third temporarily content in a bassinet nearby. She missed deadlines for the first time, sending desperate apologies to Li Chen. The video call that followed wasn't what she expected. "Ms. Vasquez, Li Chen stopped mid-sentence, his formal business expression melting into surprise as he took in the chaos behind her. The cluttered room, the crying infant in her arms, another visible in a bassinet. "You had your babies." "Yes, I'm so sorry about the petrochemical report, Mr. Chen. I'll have it to you by tomorrow morning, I promise." Elena bounced Michael gently, trying to soothe him while maintaining eye contact with her employer. "You're working with newborn triplets?" Lee's voice held disbelief. "I need this job," Elena said simply. "We need this job." Instead of termination, Lee offered flexibility. "Send what you can, when you can. Quality over deadline for now." He paused, then added, "I have clients who need more than literal translation. They need cultural navigation for business deals. When you're ready for more hours, we'll discuss." That night, Elena slept sitting upright in her bed, laptop still open on her knees, Michael and Marcus in her arms, May asleep on her chest. She woke with a start at 3 in the morning, panicked about unfinished work, only to realize all 3 babies were miraculously still sleeping. As weeks turned to months, Elena developed systems that allowed her to care for the triplets while maintaining her translation work. She noticed something that would become the foundation of her future empire. Her translations were consistently rated higher than others because she understood cultural contexts, not just vocabulary. While other translators converted words, Elena translated intent, nuance, and cultural expectations. When the triplets reached 6 months, small for their age but healthy, Elena had her epiphany. A client had complained about a perfectly accurate translation that had nevertheless damaged their business relationship with Mexican partners. Reviewing the materials, Elena immediately spotted the problem. "You translated correctly but missed the cultural expectation," she explained. "In Mexican business culture, relationship building precedes transaction. Your materials jumped straight to pricing without establishing connection." The client was impressed. "Can you fix this? We'll pay extra." "I'm not just translating your words," Elena told them, confidence growing with each word. "I'm translating your business intentions across cultures." That night, after finally getting the triplets to sleep, Elena created her first business card on her laptop using a free template. Vasquez Translations, Bridging Cultures, not just languages. She printed 20 copies at the local library, spending money she couldn't afford. Her first independent client came days later, a boutique owner wanting to import Mexican handicrafts but struggling with communication. Elena not only translated her correspondence but explained the cultural expectations of the artisans, the appropriate timing for negotiations, the importance of certain courtesies. "You're not just a translator," the woman said, impressed. "You understand both worlds." "That's exactly right," Elena replied, Michael asleep in a sling across her chest, Marcus and May miraculously napping in a double stroller beside her. "I'm not translating words. I'm translating intentions, cultures, businesses." The woman hired her on a monthly retainer, small but steady income beyond her work for Li Chen. On the day the triplets turned 6 months old, Elena bought a single cupcake from a bakery, cutting it into 4 tiny pieces. As her babies watched with wide eyes, fascinated by this new object, she made a silent toast. "To us," she whispered, "to the empire we'll build." In that cramped room in Queens, with 3 babies sleeping in makeshift cribs, no one could have guessed that Elena was establishing the foundations of a company that would one day occupy 3 entire floors in Midtown Manhattan. "To us," she whispered, "to the empire we'll build." 2 years passed in a blur of sleepless nights, constant work, and tiny milestones. Now, on a bright spring morning, Elena watched her 2-year-old triplets explore the playground equipment while she balanced her laptop on her knees, responding to client emails. Central Park buzzed with the energy of Manhattan weekends, nannies chatting in clusters, fathers teaching wobbly toddlers to kick balls, mothers arranging playdates over coffee. "How do you do it?" asked a well-dressed woman who had been observing Elena for several minutes. "3 the same age and you're working?" Elena smiled, her eyes never leaving the triplets as Michael cautiously climbed the small slide. Marcus encouraged him from the top, and May waited patiently at the bottom. "I don't have much choice," she answered honestly. The woman nodded toward Elena's screen. "You're not from here originally, are you?" "Your accent." "Mexico City," Elena replied, saving a document before closing her laptop. "But New York is home now." What she didn't add was how far they'd come from that tiny room in Queens. Now they occupied a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Washington Heights, still cramped with 3 toddlers, but a palace compared to where they'd started. "Mama, Mira!" May called out, her dark curls bouncing as she pointed to a butterfly. "I see it, mi amor," Elena answered, then seamlessly switched to English. "That's a butterfly, mariposa in Spanish. Can you say butterfly?" "Buttfly," May attempted, giggling. Elena had been teaching the triplets both Spanish and English from birth, determined they would be fully bilingual. Recently, she'd begun introducing Mandarin phrases as well, a practical decision based on her growing client base. That evening, after tucking the triplets into their shared bedroom, Elena settled at her makeshift desk, a folding table separated from the living room by a hanging curtain. Her laptop screen illuminated her tired face as a video call connected. "Elena, good evening." Li Chen's face appeared, 12 hours ahead in Beijing, but impeccably dressed as always. "I've reviewed your proposal for the Asian market expansion." She straightened, pushing aside fatigue. "And?" Li's expression remained neutral. "It's ambitious, perhaps too ambitious for someone with your current responsibilities." Elena felt a familiar spark of defiance, the same one that had carried her through the past 2 years. "My responsibilities are precisely why I need this expansion, Mr. Chen. The American-Mexican translation market has limitations. You understand this would require cultural expertise beyond language proficiency," Li said carefully. "Chinese business culture is uniquely complex." "I'm aware," Elena replied. "That's why I've been studying Mandarin for the past 6 months. The triplets are learning basic phrases as well." Li raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "You've been learning Mandarin while raising triplets and running your business?" "I study after they sleep." She didn't mention that after they sleep meant the hours between midnight and 3 in the morning. A noise behind her made Elena turn. May stood in the doorway, rubbing her eyes sleepily. "Mama, agua," she mumbled. "One moment," Elena said to Lee before rising to get her daughter water. When she returned to the screen, May on her hip, now fully awake and curious, Lee was watching thoughtfully. "Ni hao," Lee said gently to the toddler. To Elena's surprise, May replied clearly, "Ni hao." A slow smile spread across Lee's face. "Perhaps we can discuss a limited partnership arrangement. Start small, see how it develops." 3 months later, Elena had hired her first 2 employees, Maria, a Mexican translator with legal expertise, and Jin, a Chinese graduate student with perfect English and Spanish. Both worked remotely, allowing Elena to keep costs minimal while expanding her service offerings. The apartment now doubled as Vasquez Translation's headquarters. A professional website had replaced her homemade business cards, though the tagline remained, "Bridging cultures, not just languages." The curtain separating her office had been upgraded to a sliding screen, though client calls were still sometimes punctuated by toddler laughter or crying. "We need to decide," Elena told herself one evening, staring at her dwindling bank account. The triplets needed new shoes again, but her website desperately needed an upgrade to attract larger corporate clients. In the end, the triplets wore second-hand shoes from a neighborhood swap, and Elena invested in professional web design. "The shoes last months," she reasoned. "A good website could sustain us for years." This pattern repeated constantly. Business investments prioritized over personal comfort. Elena wore the same 3 outfits in rotation but paid for premium translation software. The triplets shared one bedroom while she converted the building's storage closet into a soundproofed recording space for audio translations, bribing the superintendent with free Spanish lessons. Her dedication was paying off. Vasquez Translations had grown from Elena's solo operation to a specialized boutique service with a reputation for cultural expertise beyond mere language conversion. Small businesses expanding into international markets sought her guidance, and repeat clients formed the backbone of her growing enterprise. "You've built something impressive," Li Chen told her during their monthly strategy call. "Not many could achieve this under your circumstances." Elena glanced at the triplets, now napping on a playmat in the corner after an exhausting morning at the park. "They're my motivation," she said simply. When a potential game-changing opportunity arrived, an American housewares company seeking to expand into Mexico, Elena knew it required a level of professionalism her home-based operation couldn't project. The company needed more than document translation. They required comprehensive cultural consultation on marketing, customer service protocols, and business relationship development. The morning of the presentation, Elena's carefully arranged childcare plan collapsed when her regular babysitter called with the flu. "I'll reschedule," Elena told Maria over the phone, watching the triplets eat breakfast, already dressed in their best clothes for daycare. "They won't reschedule," Maria warned. "They have 3 other agencies presenting today. If we miss our slot, we're out." Elena made a desperate decision. Packing an emergency bag with snacks, quiet toys, and tablets loaded with educational games, she dressed the triplets in their best outfits and prepared them for the most important performance of their young lives. "Today you're going to be Mama's business partners," she explained, kneeling to their level. "Remember our special quiet game? The one where we use inside voices and gentle hands?" They nodded solemnly, somehow sensing the importance of the moment. The corporate headquarters in Midtown towered intimidatingly above them. Elena straightened her only professional outfit, a navy blazer over a simple white blouse and black pants, and led her tiny entourage through the revolving doors. "Ms. Vasquez," the receptionist said, eyes widening at the sight of the 3 impeccably dressed toddlers. "Your colleagues?" "My children," Elena replied unapologetically. "Our childcare arrangements fell through. I hope this won't be a problem." Before the receptionist could respond, The company's chief marketing officer emerged from the elevator. "Elena Vasquez? I'm Dan Kessler." His eyes fell to the triplets, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Kessler," Elena began, ready to explain, when Michael stepped forward. "Hello," he said clearly, extending his small hand. "I am Michael." Dan's professional mask melted as he shook the tiny hand. "Well, hello there, Michael." Marcus and May followed their brother's lead, introducing themselves in perfect English, then surprising everyone by adding mucho gusto, with flawless pronunciation. The executive's initial skepticism transformed to charmed amusement as the triplets sat quietly during Elena's presentation, occasionally whispering to each other in a mix of Spanish and English. "As you can see," Elena explained, displaying slides on cultural market differences, "American directness in advertising can be perceived as aggressive in Mexican markets. We're not just translating your slogans, we're adapting your entire approach to resonate culturally." When one executive asked about local business protocols, Elena didn't need to consult her notes. Years of bridging these exact cultural gaps had made her an expert. "Relationships before transactions," she emphasized. "The American approach of getting straight to business can derail Mexican partnerships before they begin." By presentation's end, the triplets had won over the room, and Elena had won the contract, the largest in her company's short history. This account would require more resources, more staff, more space than her home office could accommodate. That night, as the triplets slept, Elena made the boldest decision since leaving Boston, leasing a small commercial office space in Queens. The financial commitment terrified her, but instinct told her this was their moment to grow beyond survival mode. "We can't build an empire from behind a curtain," she whispered to herself. 2 weeks later, Elena stood in the empty office space, just 500 square feet but with actual walls, a conference room barely larger than a closet, and a kitchenette. The triplets explored excitedly, their voices echoing in the unfurnished rooms. That first night, after the building emptied of daytime workers, Elena inflated a mattress in what would become the conference room. The triplets fell asleep quickly, exhausted from the excitement of their new house, as they called it. Elena assembled inexpensive furniture late into the night, the sound of her electric screwdriver muffled by the sleeping city beyond the windows. When Li Chen arrived unannounced the following morning, having detoured to New York during a business trip, he found Elena asleep on the floor beside the completed reception desk, the triplets playing quietly nearby. "You built this," Li said after she had awakened, embarrassed to be caught in such a vulnerable state. His gesture encompassed more than just the physical space. From nothing, with 3 children. Extraordinary. Elena moved to the window, gazing across the East River toward the Manhattan skyline glittering in the morning sun. "One day, we'll be there," she said, pointing to the forest of skyscrapers. As she affixed the improvised logo of Vasquez Translations to the glass door of her first commercial office, Elena couldn't imagine that in 10 years that same logo would be illuminated atop a skyscraper, visible from anywhere in Manhattan. As she affixed the improvised logo of Vasquez Translations to the glass door of her first commercial office, Elena felt a surge of pride that momentarily masked her exhaustion. 5 years had passed since that defining moment, and now, as the morning sun streamed through the windows of their significantly larger Queens office, Elena watched her 7-year-old triplets working diligently at their small desks in the corner she had designated as their after-school area. "Mama, is this correct?" Michael pushed his glasses up his nose, holding out a worksheet covered in careful Chinese characters. Elena examined his work, impressed by his precision. "Almost perfect. The stroke order on this character needs adjustment," she demonstrated with a gentle hand over his. Nearby, Marcus recited Spanish conjugations while completing his English reading assignment, effortlessly switching between languages. May, the smallest, but often the most determined, typed on a child-sized laptop, learning coding through a program Elena had discovered through a tech client. The contrast between their modest apartment in Washington Heights and the increasingly professional office space reflected Elena's philosophy: invest in the business first, personal comfort second. The office now occupied the entire floor of a small building with 6 full-time employees and a network of specialized contractors. A satellite office in Mexico City, managed by Maria, had opened 6 months earlier. Elena's phone chimed with a message from Li Chen, who had become a frequent visitor to New York over the past year. Their professional relationship had deepened, his mentorship invaluable as she navigated increasingly complex international deals. But recently, something else had begun to develop between them, unspoken but palpable during their dinner meetings that stretched late into the evening, discussing business but occasionally venturing into personal territory. Just landed. Dinner tonight? His message read. Elena felt an unexpected flutter in her stomach as she replied affirmatively, then chided herself for the reaction. Li was her most important business partner, not a romantic prospect. Romance had no place in her carefully structured life. That evening, after settling the triplets with their trusted babysitter, Elena met Li at a small Japanese restaurant in Midtown. He looked impeccable as always in a tailored charcoal suit, his keen eyes lighting up when she entered. "The Matsumoto deal closed successfully," he announced after they ordered. "Your cultural insights proved invaluable." Elena smiled, pride warming her. Their CEO specifically mentioned feeling understood, not just translated for. "This is your unique gift," Li said, studying her with admiration. "Anyone can translate words. You translate intentions, aspirations, anxieties, the human elements behind business transactions." Their conversation flowed easily, covering business developments and expansion possibilities. As they finished their meal, Li's expression became more serious. "I have a proposition," he said, setting down his tea. "A major American corporation is seeking to negotiate directly with the Guangzhou Technology Consortium. They've approached several translation services, but none have the cultural depth required." Elena leaned forward. "Which corporation?" "Halstead Innovations. They manufacture advanced medical devices and seek manufacturing partnerships in China." The name sent a jolt through Elena. Halstead Innovations was no small player. It was a Fortune 500 company with billions in annual revenue. "This would be beyond translation," Li continued. "They need someone who can navigate the complex relationship protocols of high-level Chinese business negotiations. The potential contract value is..." He named a figure that made Elena's breath catch. "That's more than our entire annual revenue," she whispered. "It would require a significant expansion," Li acknowledged. "More staff, better facilities, specialized expertise." That night, after tucking the triplets into bed, Elena paced their small apartment, calculator in hand, running numbers again and again. The opportunity was transformative but required a substantial investment. A real office in Manhattan, hiring cultural consultants specializing in Chinese business practices, technological upgrades. The next morning found her at First Queen's Bank, dressed in her most professional outfit, still far from designer quality, but carefully selected to project confidence. The loan officer, a man barely older than her 32 years, reviewed her business plan with skeptical eyes. "This is an ambitious expansion, Ms. Vasquez. The loan amount you're requesting exceeds your company's current valuation by nearly 40%. Elena maintained steady eye contact. "The Halstead contract alone would cover repayment within 18 months. I've included projections showing..." "Yes, I see your projections," he interrupted. "But you're essentially betting everything on securing this single contract." "I'm betting on my company's proven track record of converting opportunities into successful partnerships," she corrected politely. After 2 hours of questioning, the loan officer excused himself to consult with his manager. Elena slipped into the restroom, needing a moment alone. Staring at her reflection, she heard William's voice echo from the past. "You are a burden I don't intend to carry." Her hands gripped the porcelain sink. "I've carried myself," she whispered fiercely to her reflection. "I've carried 3 children. I'll carry this company to heights you never imagined possible." When the loan was provisionally approved an hour later, contingent on securing the Halstead contract, Elena felt a complex mixture of elation and terror. That evening, she sat the triplets down for a family meeting at their small kitchen table. "Things are going to change," she explained, watching their intelligent eyes absorb her words. "Mama will be working even more than usual for a while, but it's for our future." "Will we still have Saturday park days?" asked May, the most sensitive to changes in routine. "I'll do my best," Elena promised, knowing better than to guarantee what she might not deliver. "But I might need to bring work sometimes." "We can help," offered Marcus, ever the diplomat. "We're getting better at Chinese." The triplets' adaptability both inspired and pained Elena. They had never known a life where work wasn't constantly intertwined with family time, where their mother wasn't perpetually balancing multiple responsibilities. 2 weeks later, Elena signed a lease on a small office space in Midtown Manhattan, a modest suite by local standards, but a quantum leap from their Queens location. The space required significant renovation, another expense she absorbed by doing much of the work herself on weekends, the triplets helping by organizing supplies and bringing her water. The day of the first negotiation round with Halstead Innovations arrived with stomach-churning intensity. Elena had assembled a team including Lee, who had flown in specifically for this meeting, 2 cultural consultants, and herself. The Halstead executives arrived with evident skepticism about the small translation company they'd been convinced to try. "We've worked with larger firms in the past," began their chief operating officer, a silver-haired man with an expensive watch and dismissive tone, "but our Beijing office suggested your cultural approach might be valuable." Elena maintained her professional composure despite the condescension. "Larger firms excel at literal translation. We specialize in making sure you're not just understood, but welcomed." The meeting progressed with increasing tension as the Halstead team outlined their aggressive negotiation strategy for the Chinese consortium. Elena listened carefully, noting multiple potential cultural pitfalls that could derail negotiations before they began. During a break, she overheard 2 Halstead executives muttering about overpaying for glorified interpreters. Rather than confronting them, she methodically prepared her response. When the meeting reconvened, Elena highlighted a critical cultural misstep in their proposed approach. "Your opening statement focuses on efficiency and cost-cutting measures," she explained. "In Chinese business culture, especially with a consortium of this prestige, beginning with relationship building and mutual benefit would be significantly more effective." The COO scoffed. "We're not here for a cultural sensitivity seminar. We need to establish our position firmly from the start." Elena maintained her composure. "With respect, sir, establishing your position too firmly may prevent any negotiation from occurring at all." As the discussion progressed, Elena demonstrated with specific examples how their approach could be perceived as disrespectful, potentially costing them the manufacturing partnership entirely. Gradually, the executives' skepticism gave way to grudging attention. By meeting's end, the Halstead team had completely revised their approach based on Elena's guidance. The COO, initially the most dismissive, approached her privately. "You've given us perspective we clearly lacked," he admitted. "We'll proceed with your firm for the preliminary negotiations." Later that evening, celebrating the provisional contract with a modest glass of wine in her newly established office, Elena felt Lee's admiring gaze. "You built a bridge where others didn't even see the need to cross," he said quietly. Elena looked out the window toward the Manhattan skyline, now viewed from within rather than from across the river. "This is just the beginning." Lee stepped closer, the professional boundary between them momentarily thinning. For a breathless moment, Elena thought he might kiss her. The office phone rang shrilly, breaking the spell. It was the babysitter, calling because May had developed a fever. As Elena gathered her things to rush home, her mind already calculating which meetings she could reschedule and which were unmovable, she paused at the door. The temporary sign reading Vasquez Translations needed updating to reflect their expanded services. The next morning, she directed the sign maker to create a new plaque, Vasquez International Translations. While the new sign was being installed, Elena gazed up at the surrounding skyscrapers. The small name change represented something much larger, a vision expanding beyond what she had initially dared to imagine. As she returned to her office to prepare for the Halstead negotiations, she couldn't know that in just 5 years, she would be not only translating multi-billion-dollar negotiations, but facilitating them as one of the most respected intercultural mediators in the corporate world. As she returned to her office to prepare for the Halstead negotiations, Elena couldn't know that in just 5 years, she would be not only translating multi-billion-dollar negotiations, but facilitating them as one of the most respected intercultural mediators in the corporate world. 3 years had passed since that pivotal Halstead contract, transforming Vasquez International Translations from a promising boutique agency into a recognized name in corporate circles. The company now occupied an entire floor in their Midtown building, with satellite offices operating in Mexico City, Beijing, and most recently, Singapore. Elena stood at the back of the conference room, watching with pride as her 10-year-old triplets confidently introduced themselves to the audience attending her keynote presentation on cross-cultural communication in the digital age. Michael, Marcus, and May had insisted on attending, sitting in the front row, their backs straight, taking notes on tablets synchronized through the company's proprietary software. "And now, please welcome our founder and CEO, Elena Vasquez," announced the conference moderator. As applause filled the room, Elena walked to the podium with the confidence of someone who had earned her place. Her tailored suit, still not designer but significantly better quality than what she could afford 3 years ago, complemented her purposeful stride. "Business isn't just conducted between companies," she began, her accent now a cultivated asset rather than something to minimize. "It's conducted between people, each carrying their cultural DNA into every negotiation." From the front row, the triplets beamed with pride. They had grown into remarkable children, multilingual, academically advanced, and increasingly curious about the business their mother had built. On weekends and school holidays, they now accompanied her to the office, each gravitating toward different aspects of the operation. Michael analyzed contracts with precocious precision. Marcus practiced presentation skills with staff members. May absorbed technology with intuitive ease, often spotting improvements to their systems that adults had missed. After the presentation, Li Chen approached, his admiration evident. "Exceptional as always," he said, handing her a small box wrapped in elegant paper. "A small token for your continued success." Elena smiled, their shared history of professional collaboration having evolved into something deeper over the past years. His regular visits to New York had become longer, their conversations extending beyond business into personal territories, his interaction with the triplets growing increasingly paternal. That evening, after the triplets were finally asleep, Lee joined Elena on the balcony of her apartment, a significant upgrade from Washington Heights to the Upper East Side, though still modest by Manhattan standards. The city lights sparkled before them as they shared a bottle of wine. "5 years ago, you operated from a converted storage closet," Lee observed. "Now Fortune 500 companies adjust their schedules to meet yours." Elena smiled, remembering. "We've come far." Lee turned to face her fully, his expression suddenly serious. "Elena, I've been meaning to ask you something important." Her heart quickened inexplicably. "Yes?" From his pocket, Lee produced a small velvet box. "These past years working together, watching you build something extraordinary, raising these remarkable children, I've never met anyone like you." He opened the box, revealing a platinum ring with a modest but perfect diamond. "Would you consider building our future together, not just as business partners but as family?" Elena froze. memories of William's rejection suddenly flooding back. The last time she had trusted someone with her heart, with her future, he had called her a burden, had offered money to make her disappear. "Lee, she began, her voice catching. Understanding immediately crossed his face. "You're thinking of him, the man who abandoned you." Later that night, after Lee had gone, Elena sat alone on her balcony, staring at the ring box. She'd asked for time to think, and Lee had graciously understood. The triplets' laughter echoed from earlier that evening when Lee had played chess with them, patiently teaching strategies while telling stories of his childhood in Beijing. "The last time I trusted someone like this," she whispered to the night sky, "he destroyed everything I thought we were building." The following morning brought no clarity. At breakfast, the triplets sensed her distraction. "Are you okay, Mama?" Marcus asked, his perceptiveness sometimes startling. "Just thinking about some important decisions," she answered truthfully. Michael studied her with analytical eyes so similar to her own. "Is it about Mr. Chen?" Elena nearly dropped her coffee cup. "Why would you ask that?" "He looks at you the way the fathers in movies look at mothers," May observed innocently, spreading jam on her toast. "And you smile differently when he's here." That evening Lee returned for dinner, the unspoken question hanging between them. After the meal, as the triplets cleared the table, a chore they took seriously, Elena led Lee to the living room. "The last man I trusted," she began carefully, "saw me as nothing but a burden when I needed him most. He offered money to make me disappear." Lee took her hands in his. "He saw a burden. I see the strongest person I've ever known. You built all this while raising 3 children alone. You're not someone to be carried, Elena. You're the force I've always needed beside me." When Elena finally allowed herself to accept his proposal, the relief and joy that flooded through her surprised her with its intensity. The triplets, informed of the development, reacted with varying degrees of excitement and curiosity. 2 nights later, during a family dinner, Marcus looked up from his plate with characteristic directness. "Mama, who is our biological father?" The question hung in the air. Elena had always answered their inquiries honestly but vaguely. "He wasn't ready to be a father. He chose not to be part of our lives." Now, facing 3 increasingly perceptive 10-year-olds, she recognized they needed more. "His name is William Ainsworth. He's from Boston. When I told him I was pregnant, he decided he didn't want to be involved." "Why?" May asked, her expression troubled. Elena chose her words carefully. "He had different priorities. His career, his social position, they were more important to him than family." Later that night, Elena found Michael quietly using her laptop, quickly closing the browser when she entered. "What are you researching?" she asked, though she suspected. Michael hesitated, then admitted, "Ainsworth. It's not a common name." Elena sat beside him. "You're curious about him. That's natural. Did he ever try to find us? To see if we were okay?" Michael's voice held a vulnerability rarely displayed by her most stoic child. "No, sweetheart. He made his choice very clear. As their wedding plans progressed, a transformative business opportunity arrived simultaneously. A major American technology company sought Vasquez International's services to mediate complex negotiations with the Chinese government regarding data security protocols, a contract potentially worth 8 figures. The meeting with the tech executives unfolded with an intensity that reminded Elena of the Halstead negotiations years earlier. Again, skepticism about her relatively new company permeated the room. These negotiations involve national security considerations, proprietary technology, and cultural sensitivities at the highest levels, explained the CEO, clearly doubtful. "What makes you qualified for this level of mediation?" Elena didn't flinch. "You need someone who understands not just what both sides are saying, but what they're meaning. The unspoken concerns, the cultural context behind each demand, the face-saving requirements that might derail progress if ignored." Her detailed analysis of previous failed negotiations between Western tech companies and Chinese authorities gradually transformed their skepticism into consideration. By meeting's end, they had tentatively agreed to engage her services, pending final approval from their board. That evening, Elena and Lee celebrated both their engagement and the pending contract with a quiet dinner after the triplets were asleep. "This contract will change everything," Elena observed. "We'll need to expand significantly, hire specialized staff, travel extensively between New York, Washington, and Beijing. The timing with our wedding, with integrating our family," Lee began. "Will be challenging," Elena finished. "The triplets are used to my work demands, but this will be different." The following weekend, Elena sat the triplets down for another family meeting. "The new contract will mean changes," she explained. "Lee and I will need to travel frequently. We'll be more absent than usual for a while." "But it's important, right?" Marcus asked, always quick to understand business priorities. "Yes, it's very important for the company." May, her eyes suddenly welling with tears, asked the question that pierced Elena's heart. "Is it more important than us?" Elena pulled her daughter close. "Nothing is more important than you three. Nothing." Later that evening, after a long family discussion, they developed a plan together. The triplets would be included in appropriate aspects of the business, learning about international relations in real time. They would use video calls to maintain daily contact during travel periods. Most importantly, they established a sacred weekly family time that would never be compromised regardless of business demands. "You are part of this too," Lee told them warmly. "Our family business." As they celebrated the new contract and their engagement with a small family party on the balcony, none of them could imagine that in just 2 years, an unexpected medical diagnosis would completely change the course of their lives, leaving Elena alone to command an even larger empire. As they celebrated the new contract and their engagement with a small family party on the balcony, none of them could imagine that in just 2 years, an unexpected medical diagnosis would completely change the course of their lives, leaving Elena alone to command an even larger empire. The wedding took place on a perfect spring day in the New York Botanical Garden. Elena had chosen the venue for its symbolic blend of cultures, where exotic flowering plants from Asia and the Americas thrived side by side in harmonious beauty. The ceremony was intimate, with only 50 guests, including the company's key executives and the triplets' favorite teachers. 12-year-old May scattered rose petals down the aisle, her dark curls adorned with delicate white flowers. Marcus and Michael walked proudly beside Elena, one on each arm, their matching suits and solemn expressions reflecting the significance they placed on their role. When they reached Lee at the altar, both boys formally gave away their mother with a practiced bow that honored Lee's cultural traditions. "We are not just witnessing the union of two people," said the officiant, "but the formation of a family that already carries a legacy of determination, resilience, and success." Elena, radiant in a simple ivory sheath dress, looked at Lee with genuine love that had grown steadily over their years together. His patient devotion to her and the triplets had gradually erased her fears about trusting her heart to someone again. In Lee, she had found not just a romantic partner, but a true ally who valued her strength rather than finding it threatening. The reception flowed seamlessly between cultures, traditional Chinese elements harmonizing with Mexican touches and American conventions. The triplets moved confidently among the guests, switching languages effortlessly as they conversed with visitors from 3 continents. After dinner, Lee gathered the triplets for an impromptu strategy lesson using the Chinese chess set he had gifted them months earlier. Guests smiled at the unusual family bonding moment, but Elena recognized it as perfectly characteristic of their blended lives where business wisdom and family connection were constantly interwoven. "See how the pieces work together?" Lee explained, moving a piece across the board while the triplets watched intently. "Each has different strengths, different movements. The game is won by understanding how to deploy these differences strategically." Like negotiation teams, observed Michael, already showing his analytical capabilities. Exactly, Lee smiled approvingly. Different perspectives creating a stronger whole. 6 months after the wedding, during a particularly high-stakes negotiation with Chinese technology officials, Elena noticed something concerning. Lee, normally meticulous in his presentations, stumbled over familiar terminology. Later, he dismissed it as jet lag, but Elena recognized the flash of confusion in his eyes, something she had never seen before. 2 weeks later, during a board meeting at their now expanded offices, Lee completely lost his train of thought mid-sentence. Elena smoothly continued his explanation without drawing attention to the lapse, but her worry deepened when she caught him massaging his temples afterward, his face tight with pain. "It's just stress headaches," he insisted when she confronted him privately. "The Singapore expansion is demanding." Elena scheduled a doctor's appointment anyway, framing it as a routine executive physical. The neurologist's office was quiet and understated, belying the life-altering news they would receive there. "The MRI shows an arteriovenous malformation," explained Dr. Levin, pointing to the brain scan displayed on her monitor. "Essentially, it's an abnormal tangle of blood vessels that appears to have been present since birth. It's quite large and in a precarious location." "What are the treatment options?" Elena asked, her voice steady despite the fear tightening her chest. "Given its size and location, surgical intervention carries significant risks," the doctor continued. "We could attempt embolization to reduce blood flow to the malformation, but complete removal would be extremely challenging." Lee listened with practiced calm, asking detailed questions about success rates and recovery timelines. Only Elena could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his normally steady hands. That night, they stood together on the rooftop garden of their building, a peaceful retreat Lee had designed with bamboo fountains and miniature cherry trees. The city lights stretched before them, a testament to all they had built together. "We should discuss contingencies," Lee said quietly, his practical nature asserting itself even in crisis. "For the company, for the children." "We're going to fight this," Elena insisted. "We'll get second opinions, explore every option." Lee turned to her, his expression gentle but resolute. "We will, but you've always been the true visionary, Elena. The company has flourished because of your insight, your determination." Over the following weeks, they consulted specialists across the country while maintaining a facade of normalcy at work. The triplets, perceptive as always, sensed the underlying tension despite their parents' efforts to shield them. One evening, Lee presented Elena with legal documents ensuring she would maintain complete control of their merged business interests. "This isn't necessary now," Elena protested, pushing the papers away. "It is," Lee insisted softly. "I trust you to continue our legacy, whatever happens." 3 months later, during a routine business trip to Chicago, Elena received the call that shattered her world. Lee had collapsed during a meeting in New York. By the time she reached the hospital, he was already gone. The arteriovenous malformation had ruptured catastrophically, causing a massive hemorrhagic stroke. The next hours passed in a blur of medical terminology and administrative details. But the most devastating moment came when Elena connected with the triplets via video call from the hospital's private family room. "Something terrible has happened," she began, struggling to maintain composure for their sake. Through the screen, she watched their expressions transform as she explained. Michael's face becoming absolutely still, Marcus's crumpling in open grief, May's eyes widening in disbelief before the tears came. "I'm coming home right now," Elena promised. "We'll get through this together." The funeral was a dignified affair that honored Lee's cultural heritage while reflecting his adopted American life. Business leaders from 3 continents attended, many having flown in specifically to pay respects to the man who had helped bridge their worlds. Throughout the service, the triplets maintained remarkable composure, standing beside their mother with solemn dignity that belied their 12 years. 2 weeks later, Elena faced the company's board of directors for the first time as sole CEO. Though no one spoke the words directly, she could sense the unspoken questions hovering in the air. Could she maintain the company's trajectory without Lee? Would clients remain confident in their services? Was she strong enough to lead alone? Lee's absence leaves an immeasurable void, Elena acknowledged, her voice steady despite her grief. But his vision remains alive through our work, through our team, and through me. Her gaze moved deliberately around the table. I will not hesitate to make difficult decisions. We will not merely sustain what we've built, we will expand it. The board members exchanged glances, some skeptical, others reassessing the woman before them. By meeting's end, Elena had outlined an aggressive growth strategy that would honor Lee's legacy while establishing her unquestionable authority as leader. For weeks, Elena maintained her composure, handling client concerns, staff anxieties, and the triplets' grief with outward steadiness. But late one night, alone in her office long after everyone had gone home, the facade finally cracked. Surrounded by expansion plans and acquisition proposals, Elena buried her face in her hands and allowed herself to truly feel the crushing weight of her loss. She didn't hear the office door open, didn't notice the triplets entering until they were beside her. Michael placing a hand on her right shoulder, Marcus on her left, May gently touching her arm. They had convinced the building security to let them up, sensing their mother needed them. No words were exchanged. None were necessary. The four of them remained connected in silent solidarity, their shared grief becoming something else, a determination to honor the man who had chosen to be their father when their biological father had rejected that privilege. In the months that followed, Elena channeled her grief into relentless forward motion. Where competitors might have expected Vasquez Chen International to falter after Lee's death, instead they watched in astonishment as the company expanded more aggressively than ever. Elena acquired 3 smaller translation firms, established new offices in Dubai and Toronto, and secured contracts with 2 additional Fortune 100 companies. The day Elena officially renamed the company Vasquez International, the sign makers worked through the night to install the new corporate identification. She insisted, however, on maintaining the Chinese character Lee had designed as part of their original logo, a subtle symbol representing bridge between worlds. "He will always be part of who we are," she explained to the triplets as they watched the new sign being raised. "What he built with us doesn't disappear." While signing the documents for the aggressive acquisition of 3 smaller competitors, Elena didn't know that her meteoric expansion after Lee's death would put her directly on William Ainsworth's radar, whose own company was beginning to crumble in Boston. While signing the documents for the aggressive acquisition of 3 smaller competitors, Elena didn't know that her meteoric expansion after Lee's death would put her directly on William Ainsworth's radar, whose own company was beginning to crumble in Boston. 3 years had transformed grief into fuel. At 41, Elena Vasquez had reshaped Vasquez International into an empire that now occupied 3 entire floors in their midtown building, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office on the 42nd floor. She watched dawn break over Manhattan, the early light catching on glass towers that had once seemed impossibly distant from her tiny Queens apartment. "The quarterly numbers, Ms. Vasquez," her assistant said, entering with a leather portfolio embossed with the company's logo. "We've exceeded projections by 17%. Elena accepted the report with a measured smile. What had begun as a desperate remote translation job had evolved into a communication powerhouse with offices in 7 countries. Their specialty, cultural intelligence for corporate negotiations, had positioned them as indispensable mediators between American companies and Asian markets. "Has the Chinese delegation confirmed their attendance at the Trans-Pacific Conference?" Elena asked, checking her digital calendar. "Yes, and they've reiterated that they'll only negotiate with your personal presence in the room." Elena nodded, satisfaction warming her. The reputation she'd built wasn't just about linguistic accuracy, but about cultural fluency. the ability to navigate unspoken expectations and implicit hierarchies that derailed less sophisticated negotiators. Later that evening, in her Upper East Side duplex, purchased with cash 3 years earlier, Elena finished reviewing contracts while the triplets, now 15, moved through their evening routines with the self-sufficiency she'd cultivated in them from childhood. Michael adjusted his glasses, eyes never leaving his tablet screen. "Mom, I've completed the analysis of that Singapore contract. There are 3 problematic clauses in the translation that could create liability issues." Elena looked up, pride swelling as she studied her oldest son by 3 minutes. Michael had inherited her analytical mind, enhanced by an almost preternatural attention to detail. At 15, he could spot contractual vulnerabilities that seasoned attorneys sometimes missed. Across the room, Marcus practiced Mandarin with his tutor via video call, his pronunciation perfect, his conversational flow natural despite the language's tonal complexities. Already competing successfully in national debate tournaments, he had set his sights on Harvard Law, determined to expand the company's legal influence. "Abuela, sí, estaremos allí para tu cumpleaños," May promised into her phone, her Spanish flowing as naturally as her English and Mandarin. The youngest triplet by 5 minutes had blossomed into a technological prodigy, developing applications that streamlined the company's translation processes. The 3 teenagers had grown up immersed in international business. Trilingual since toddlerhood, each now studied a 4th language. They interned at the company during summers, knew executives from 3 continents by name, and understood the value of the empire their mother had built from nothing. "Remember, we'll go directly from school to the Waldorf today," Elena reminded them, checking her Rolex, a gift she'd purchased for herself after closing their largest contract to date. "The conference is important." "Can we stay for the gala dinner too?" May asked hopefully. "Of course. You're the future of the company," Elena replied, kissing each one on the forehead. A ritual she'd maintained since their infancy, now requiring her to reach up to Michael and Marcus, who had outgrown her by several inches. In the private car heading to their elite Manhattan prep school, Elena reflected on their extraordinary journey. She remembered the nights working while the triplets slept 3 to a crib in that first Queens apartment, the early client meetings in coffee shops, babies strapped to her chest and back, the first tiny office with its second-hand furniture, the risky loan for their Mexico City expansion, the marriage to Lee that had brought not just love but strategic growth into Asian markets. Each sacrifice had built toward this reality. Net worth, $223 million. Employees, 840 across 8 countries. Primary clients, Fortune 500 companies and Chinese tech giants who adjusted their schedules to accommodate hers. The car stopped in front of the school's imposing entrance. "I'm proud of you," Elena told her children as they gathered their designer backpacks. "Today is a big day for the company." What Elena didn't know, it was also the day when the past would finally catch up with her. Hours later, Elena entered the grand lobby of the Waldorf Astoria, impeccable in a wine-colored Chanel suit that accentuated her confident posture. She had chosen her outfit carefully, expensive enough to signal success, but not ostentatious. Power, in her experience, didn't need to shout. Immediately, she was surrounded by executives eager for her attention. The annual Trans-Pacific Investment Conference gathered financial elites from 2 continents, and Elena was no longer merely a service provider. She had become an essential power broker in these negotiations. The Chinese delegation will only proceed if Ms. Vasquez herself conducts the translations, her vice president informed the organizing committee, whose members nodded with understanding. Elena's reputation had transcended her original role. She was now the conduit through which billion-dollar deals flowed. In an adjacent lobby, William Ainsworth, now 45 with pronounced temples and a permanent expression of worry, observed the commotion surrounding Elena. After years of questionable decisions and an expensive divorce, Ainsworth Investments struggled to maintain relevance. This conference represented perhaps his last chance to attract Asian investors to save his floundering company. William's blood froze as he recognized Elena. The desperate immigrant he had dismissed 15 years ago was now receiving standing ovations from the same elite he had always yearned to impress. "My God, it's her! And those teenagers! They can't be! Are they my children?" he muttered to himself, watching the triplets who arrived elegantly dressed, fluently alternating between languages as they greeted international executives. Michael stood slightly apart, his analytical gaze assessing the room with a detachment William recognized from his own youth. Marcus moved effortlessly between conversation groups, his charisma evident in the way adults leaned toward him when he spoke. May, smaller than her brothers but radiating quiet confidence, explained something on her tablet to an impressed Japanese businessman. William couldn't tear his eyes away. The children he had rejected before birth now moved through his world with more ease and authority than he himself commanded. The family he might have had, the empire he could have shared. The conference director approached the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats for our keynote address by Elena Vasquez, founder and CEO of Vasquez International." William found a seat at the back of the ballroom, his hands trembling slightly as he watched Elena take the stage. Gone was the uncertain young woman who had stood in his apartment 15 years ago. In her place stood a commanding presence who owned the room before speaking a single word. "The post-pandemic market convergence presents unprecedented opportunities," Elena began, her voice clear and authoritative. What followed was a masterclass in global economic analysis, delivered seamlessly in alternating English, Mandarin, and Spanish without consulting notes once. William watched, transfixed, as the audience, composed of financial leaders who had once barely acknowledged his presence, responded to her with rapt attention. The triplets sat in the front row, occasionally making notes on synchronized tablets, their posture reflecting the discipline and confidence their mother had instilled in them. When Elena concluded to a standing ovation, William applauded mechanically, his mind still processing the surreal transformation. The woman he had dismissed as a burden now commanded complete attention from the global financial elite. The children he had never known, his biological children, were clearly exceptional, confidently engaging with CEOs and sovereign fund directors. During the reception that followed, William maneuvered carefully through the crowded room, trying to approach Elena without being noticed prematurely. He needed to think, to formulate an approach. Ainsworth Investments teetered on the brink of bankruptcy after a series of failed cryptocurrency investments and the exodus of important clients. Access to the Asian contacts Elena clearly dominated could be his salvation. "Impressive presentation," he finally said, positioning himself beside her as she conversed with a group of Japanese executives. "I always knew you had potential." Elena froze. 15 years vanished in an instant. The voice, though more worn, was unmistakable. She turned slowly, her face a perfect mask of professional control, only her eyes revealing recognition. "William Ainsworth," she said, neither a question nor a greeting, simply an acknowledgement. The Japanese executives, sensing the sudden tension, politely excused themselves. "You look stunning, Elena," William continued, his rehearsed smile not reaching his anxious eyes. "What an impressive trajectory you've built. I always—" "Mama!" Michael interrupted, approaching with a tablet. "Mr. Nakamura needs clarification on the semiconductor sector projections. I believe there's a discrepancy in the future exchange rates." William observed the teenager, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same blue eyes he saw in the mirror every day. The shock was visceral. While journalists from the Wall Street Journal discreetly took notes about the dramatic encounter, William couldn't imagine that the next morning his name would be in the headlines, not as the respected financier he once was, but as the man who rejected the family that could have been his salvation. While journalists from the Wall Street Journal discreetly took notes about the dramatic encounter, William couldn't imagine that the next morning his name would be in the headlines, not as the respected financier he once was, but as the man who rejected the family that could have been his salvation. The grand ballroom of the Waldorf Astoria shimmered under crystal chandeliers, the soft lighting designed to flatter the powerful and wealthy who gathered beneath them. Elena concluded her keynote presentation on post-pandemic market convergence with remarkable fluidity, effortlessly switching between English, Mandarin, and Spanish without once consulting notes. The audience of 300 executives and investors responded with a standing ovation that rippled through the room like a wave. William Ainsworth applauded mechanically from the back of the hall, his mind still processing the surreal transformation before him. The woman he had dismissed as a burden now commanded complete attention from the global financial elite. The children he had never known, his biological children, were clearly exceptional, confidently engaging with CEOs and sovereign fund directors. During the cocktail reception that followed, William carefully maneuvered through the crowded room, trying to approach Elena without being noticed prematurely. He needed to think, to formulate an approach. Ainsworth Investments teetered on the brink of bankruptcy after a series of failed cryptocurrency investments and the exodus of important clients. Access to the Asian contacts Elena clearly dominated could be his salvation. "Impressive presentation," he finally said, positioning himself beside her as she conversed with a group of Japanese executives. "I always knew you had potential." Elena froze. 15 years vanished in an instant. The voice, though more worn, was unmistakable. She turned slowly, her face a perfect mask of professional control, only her eyes revealing the recognition. "William Ainsworth," she said, neither a question nor a greeting, simply an acknowledgement of his existence. The Japanese executives, sensing the sudden tension, politely excused themselves with slight bows. "You look stunning, Elena," William continued, his rehearsed smile not reaching his anxious eyes. "What an impressive trajectory you've built. I always—" "Mama," Michael interrupted, approaching with a tablet. "Mr. Nakamura needs clarification on the semiconductor sector projections. I believe there's a discrepancy in the future exchange rates." William observed the teenager, tall, broad-shouldered, with the same blue eyes he saw in the mirror every day. The shock was visceral, like a physical blow to his chest. "Michael," Elena said softly, "this is William Ainsworth, of Ainsworth Investments from Boston." No additional explanation, no indication of their shared past. Michael adjusted his glasses, studying William with distant curiosity. "Ainsworth Investments, the management firm that lost 40% of assets under management in the last 3 years after the compliance scandal with Middle Eastern funds?" William paled, his shoulders tensing. "There have been some temporary setbacks, but—" "Mr. Ainsworth," Michael interrupted, his voice surprisingly assertive for a teenager, "my mother doesn't accept meetings without prior scheduling, especially with companies with credit ratings as low as yours." The comment, delivered in a normal tone, seemed to echo in the immediate space. Nearby executives glanced discreetly, some recognizing William, others merely curious about the palpable tension. Marcus and May approached, flanking their mother like protective guards, instinctively sensing her discomfort. "These are my children," Elena said, quiet pride in her voice. "Michael, Marcus, and May. My junior partners and the future of Vasquez International." William swallowed hard, studying the faces of the 3 teenagers, his younger versions reflected in subtle details: Marcus's chin, May's eyebrows, Michael's posture. "They're extraordinary," William stammered, extending a hand that no one accepted. "I'd like to— perhaps we could talk privately?" "About what exactly?" Elena asked, her voice now cold as the Boston winter that had once nearly destroyed her. "We have no pending business, William." "Elena, please. 15 years is a long time. People change, make mistakes, learn." Movement around the ballroom gradually diminished as more people noticed the tense conversation. William Ainsworth, once respected on Wall Street, now visibly uncomfortable before the CEO everyone was trying to impress. "Mr. Ainsworth," Marcus intervened, My mother's presentation mentioned that 62% of trans-Pacific mergers fail due to inadequate cultural intelligence. You clearly didn't do your homework before attempting this approach. Some nearby executives laughed discreetly. Humiliation burned William's face, a flush creeping up his neck. I just wanted... William? Elena finally interrupted him, her voice surprisingly gentle, almost compassionate. I should thank you for tearing up that check that night. It was the moment I learned that my worth wouldn't be determined by men like you, but by the empire I built while you were too busy underestimating women like me. The silence that followed was deafening. Then, a voice from across the room. William Ainsworth? From Boston? Aren't you the one who... Chen Wei, leader of the Chinese delegation, approached with his translator. Ms. Vasquez, forgive me, but is this man known to you? Elena hesitated for only a second. Yes, Mr. Chen. Mr. Ainsworth and I knew each other many years ago in Boston. Before your children were born? Asked Chen, observing the triplets with new eyes. Exactly before, Elena confirmed without elaborating. Understanding spread through the ballroom like ink in water, whispers, glances, conclusions being formed. Manhattan's financial elite, always hungry for backstage drama, quickly connected the dots. Mama, May said in perfect Mandarin, loud enough to be heard. Mr. Chen confirmed they'll transfer their entire portfolio to our management. Chen smiled, also responding in Mandarin, Your mother built something admirable from nothing. We value people who demonstrate such resilience and integrity. The meaningful look he cast toward William made it clear that the implications of the past had been understood. William, now isolated in a corner of the ballroom, watched helplessly as potential investors drifted away from him, gravitating toward Elena and her children. The empire he could have shared, the family he rejected, the fortune he dismissed, all now permanently beyond his reach. His phone vibrated with an urgent message from his current wife. Call me now. Something's happening with the Boston Herald business reporter. William excused himself to an empty hallway, his hand shaking as he dialed. His wife's voice, tight with controlled fury, confirmed his worst fears. A reporter called asking for comment about your abandoned family that's now running Vasquez International. They're running a story tomorrow. What the hell, William? As the evening progressed, William watched from an increasingly isolated position as Elena and the triplets moved through the gala dinner with practiced ease. Michael engaged with technology executives, discussing semiconductor trends with surprising expertise. Marcus charmed a group of European investors with anecdotes delivered in flawless French, apparently his fourth language. May demonstrated a proprietary translation algorithm to amazed software developers from Silicon Valley. They were extraordinary, these children he had dismissed as a burden before they were even born. They represented everything the Ainsworth name was supposed to embody: intelligence, sophistication, business acumen. Yet they carried none of his DNA in their achievements, none of his influence in their success. Elena had built them, shaped them, given them the world he had denied them. William left the gala early, his stomach churning with a nauseating mixture of regret and panic. His car waited in the hotel's circular driveway, the driver opening the door without meeting his eyes. Had the news already spread so quickly? In his hotel room, William poured himself a double scotch with trembling hands, then sat heavily on the edge of the bed. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. Colleagues, board members, his panicked PR director. He turned it off, unable to face the questions. Outside his window, Manhattan glittered indifferently, the city that had embraced Elena while his own carefully constructed world began to crumble. In the morning, his name would be in the headlines of the Wall Street Journal. Social scandal shakes financial conference. Ainsworth Investments CEO confronted by abandoned family, now billionaires. The tension between Elena and William had created a gravitational pull throughout the ballroom, drawing attention from every corner. Marcus and May moved with purposeful strides to join Michael, forming a protective barrier around their mother. William stood transfixed, studying the faces of the three teenagers, identifying his own features reflected back at him. The distinctive Ainsworth blue eyes, the sharp jawline, the tall, confident posture that generations of his family had carried. "They're extraordinary," William stammered, extending a hand that hung awkwardly in the space between them, unmet by anyone. "I'd like to… perhaps we could talk privately." Elena's expression remained perfectly composed, a skill honed through countless high-stakes negotiations. "About what exactly? We have no pending business, William." "Elena, please." His voice took on a desperate edge. 15 years is a long time. People change, make mistakes, learn. The elegant crowd that had been subtly watching the interaction now made little effort to disguise their interest. Conversations throughout the ballroom quieted as executives turned to observe William Ainsworth, once a respected figure in East Coast finance, now visibly floundering before the woman whose keynote address had received a standing ovation minutes earlier. "Mr. Ainsworth," Marcus intervened, his diplomatic tone belying the steel beneath. "My mother's presentation mentioned that 62% of trans-Pacific mergers fail due to inadequate cultural intelligence. You clearly didn't do your homework before attempting this approach." Several nearby executives failed to suppress their amused reactions. William's face flushed crimson, the humiliation burning through his practiced facade. "I just wanted…" "William," Elena interrupted, her voice surprisingly gentle, almost compassionate. "I should thank you for tearing up that check that night. It was the moment I learned that my worth wouldn't be determined by men like you, but by the empire I built while you were too busy underestimating women like me." The silence that followed her words was absolute, as if the entire room had collectively held its breath. Then, a heavily accented voice broke the stillness from several feet away. "William Ainsworth? From Boston? Aren't you the one who…" Chen Wei, the distinguished leader of the Chinese delegation, approached with measured steps, his translator following closely. Chen's reputation as Beijing's most influential private equity director made his presence commanding even in this gathering of power brokers. "Ms. Vasquez," Chen said through his translator, though it was widely known he understood English perfectly. "Forgive my intrusion, but is this man known to you?" Elena hesitated for only a second, weighing 15 years of private history against the public moment unfolding before her. "Yes, Mr. Chen. Mr. Ainsworth and I knew each other many years ago in Boston." Chen's gaze shifted between Elena and the triplets, his experienced eyes making calculations. "Before your children were born?" he asked, studying the teenagers with renewed interest. "Exactly before," Elena confirmed, offering no further elaboration. The implication hung in the air, crystalline in its clarity. Understanding rippled through the ballroom like a current, as Manhattan's financial elite, always hungry for the dramas playing out behind Bloomberg terminals and boardroom doors, connected the obvious dots. Whispers traveled from group to group, glances darted between William's increasingly pallid complexion and the poised teenagers who so clearly carried his genetic imprint. "Mama," May said in flawless Mandarin, her voice pitched precisely to be heard by those nearby. "Mr. Chen has confirmed that they will transfer their entire portfolio to our management." Chen smiled, responding in his native tongue. "Your mother has built something admirable from nothing. We value people who demonstrate such resilience and integrity." The meaningful look he cast toward William made it abundantly clear that the implications of the past had been fully understood and factored into his business decisions. William found himself gradually isolated, standing alone as potential investors who had earlier expressed interest in meeting with him now drifted toward Elena and her children, drawn to the gravitational force of success and authentic narrative. He watched helplessly as the empire he could have shared, the family he had rejected, the fortune he had so casually dismissed, all now existed permanently beyond his reach. His phone vibrated insistently in his pocket. Retreating to a quiet corner, William saw his current wife's name flashing on the screen alongside 7 missed calls from his company's public relations director. With trembling fingers, he answered, "William, what the hell is happening?" His wife's voice, tight with controlled fury, sliced through the background noise of the gala. "A reporter from the Boston Herald called asking for comment about your abandoned family that's now running Vasquez International. They're running a story tomorrow morning." Cold dread pooled in William's stomach as he realized the private humiliation of this evening was about to become very public. "I can explain," he began, though he wasn't sure he could. "Save it," his wife snapped. "Our name is going to be dragged through every financial publication by tomorrow noon. Fix this." The call ended abruptly. When William returned to the main ballroom, the dynamics had shifted even further. Elena and the triplets now stood at the center of the most influential circle in the room, Chen Wei's delegation flanked by executives from Singapore sovereign funds and Japanese technology conglomerates. Michael was explaining something on his tablet to an impressed group of analysts, his articulation precise and authoritative despite his youth. Marcus engaged effortlessly with a French banking executive, apparently in fluent French. May demonstrated something on her custom device to wide-eyed software developers from Silicon Valley. They were extraordinary. These children he had dismissed as a burden before they were even born. They represented everything the Ainsworth name was supposed to embody: intelligence, sophistication, business acumen. Yet they carried none of his influence in their success. Elena had built them, shaped them, given them the world he had denied them. Throughout the remainder of the evening, William made several attempts to approach Elena again, each time finding his path subtly blocked by different executives eager to speak with her. Whether orchestrated or coincidental, the effect was the same. He remained isolated while Elena and the triplets moved through the gala with practiced ease, securing connections and commitments that would further expand their empire. By 10:30, William surrendered to the inevitable. As he collected his coat from the attendant, he noticed a Wall Street Journal reporter discreetly taking notes near the ballroom entrance. Their eyes met briefly, and William recognized the predatory gleam of a journalist who had just witnessed a career-defining story unfold. In his hotel room, William poured himself a double scotch with shaking hands, then sat heavily on the edge of the bed. His phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications, concerned board members, his panicked PR director, his lawyer. He turned it off, unable to face the barrage of questions for which he had no satisfactory answers. Outside his window, Manhattan glittered indifferently, the city that had embraced Elena while his own carefully constructed world began to crumble. Tomorrow morning, his name would appear in the headlines of the Wall Street Journal: "Social Scandal Shakes Financial Conference, Ainsworth Investments CEO confronted by abandoned family, now billionaires." As William contemplated the ruins of his reputation, across town in her Upper East Side apartment, Elena stood on her terrace with the triplets, the 4 of them looking out at the city that had given them a second chance. No words were needed between them. Their journey from desperation to triumph had forged a bond deeper than language could express. What tomorrow's headlines would bring was irrelevant. They had already written their own story, one of resilience, determination, and success that no newspaper could fully capture. While journalists from the Wall Street Journal discreetly took notes about the dramatic encounter, William couldn't imagine that the next morning his name would be in the headlines, not as the respected financier he once was, but as the man who rejected the family that could have been his salvation. The morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Elena's Upper East Side apartment, illuminating the headlines that now dominated the Wall Street Journal's front page: "Social Scandal Shakes Financial Conference, CEO of Ainsworth Investments confronted by family abandoned, now billionaires." Elena prepared coffee in the kitchen as the triplets sat in unusual silence, processing the previous evening's revelations. Michael methodically scrolled through the article on his tablet, his expression unreadable behind his glasses. "They've done their research thoroughly. There are quotes from 3 people who knew you both in Boston." Elena placed mugs of coffee on the marble kitchen island, her movements deliberate and calm. The storm she had avoided for 15 years had finally broken, but strangely, she felt only peace. "So he is our biological father," Michael stated clinically, not a question, but a confirmation of facts long suspected. "Yes," Elena answered simply, adding nothing more. "Why did you never tell us?" May asked, her voice more wounded than accusatory. Of the 3, she had always been the most emotionally attuned, the one who felt things most deeply. Elena sighed, sitting down with them at the kitchen table that had witnessed countless family discussions over the years. "Because he chose not to be part of our lives. And because after I met Lee, I hoped we could simply move forward." "Lee was our father," Marcus asserted with firm conviction, "in all the ways that matter." Elena smiled gratefully, touched by her son's clarity. Yes, he was. Her phone rang incessantly throughout the morning. The public relations director reported that Ainsworth Investments stock had plummeted 18% at market opening. 3 major clients had already canceled contracts, citing ethical concerns. William's current wife, a Greenwich, Connecticut socialite, was reportedly requesting temporary separation. Meanwhile, Vasquez International's shares had risen 7%, with analysts citing the inspirational appeal of Elena's triumph over adversity story. By afternoon, the inevitable occurred. The reception desk called to inform Elena that William Ainsworth had appeared in their building lobby, pleading for 5 minutes of conversation. After consulting briefly with the Triplets, who expressed curiosity rather than apprehension, Elena agreed to receive him in the company's main conference room, not in her personal office, which remained her sanctum. William entered, his defeated posture and bloodshot eyes revealing a sleepless night. His once immaculate suit appeared slept in, his tie loosened at a careless angle. "Did you plan all this? Your revenge?" he asked without preamble. Elena laughed, genuinely surprised by the accusation. "William, until yesterday I didn't know you would be at that conference. I haven't thought about you in years." The indifference struck William more devastatingly than any anger could have. In his darkest moments he had occasionally imagined Elena somewhere, still wounded by his rejection, perhaps even hating him with the passionate intensity such emotions required. The reality, that she had built an extraordinary life in which he figured not at all, was somehow worse. "I want to know my children," William declared, straightening his shoulders in an attempt at authority. "I have rights." "No, you don't," Elena interrupted calmly. "Legally, you have no rights whatsoever. You never acknowledged paternity, never paid child support, never showed any interest. And morally?" She paused, letting the question hang. "You forfeited any moral claim when you told me I was a burden you didn't intend to carry?" William collapsed into a conference chair, the memory of his own cruel words landing like physical blows. "I was young, ambitious, frightened." "I was young too, William," Elena replied evenly. "I was 26, alone in a foreign country, pregnant with triplets, without family, without support. The difference is that I didn't choose the easy path." The conference room door opened as the triplets entered, a decision they had made together after brief deliberation. They observed the man who shared their DNA but nothing of their journey, their expressions ranging from Michael's analytical detachment to May's barely concealed emotional turmoil. "You want to know us now," Michael stated, adjusting his glasses, "because we're useful to you, because our mother's empire could save your failing company." William attempted to protest, but Marcus raised his hand in a gesture surprisingly authoritative for a 15-year-old. "I researched you last night," Marcus continued. 3 marriages, no other children, 8 lawsuits for questionable business practices, a company on the verge of bankruptcy. "And a Hamptons house being foreclosed by the bank," May added, consulting her tablet. "Approximate value, $12 million. Our summer house in the Hamptons is worth $18 million. Mom bought it 3 years ago in cash." William paled as May continued, her facility with numbers revealing another painful contrast. Your current net worth is estimated at $34 million with debts of $28 million. Our mother is worth $223 million, debt-free. Elena observed the interaction with a mixture of pride and compassion, not for William, but for her children processing this harsh reality. "What do you want?" William finally asked, defeated. "Money? I don't have much. Public acknowledgement? I can do that." "We don't want anything," Michael responded simply. "We came only to see the man who thought our mother wasn't good enough." The three teenagers rose in unison, a perfect unit formed through adversity overcome. "We already have a legacy, Mr. Ainsworth," Marcus said. "We don't need your surname." "And we already had a father," May completed, her voice breaking for the first time. "One who chose us." The triplets exited, leaving Elena and William alone again. The silence between them felt enormous, filled with 15 years of divergent paths. "They are extraordinary," William finally said, tears in his eyes. "I have 3 other children, you know, with my second wife. Teenagers, too. We barely speak. They're in European boarding schools." Elena didn't respond. There was no satisfaction in her victory, only the tranquility of a journey completed. "You've built something incredible, Elena, from nothing, without me." "It wasn't to prove something to you, William," she responded softly. "At the beginning, perhaps, but later. It was for me, for them, for the life we deserved." William nodded, finally understanding. "I think I always knew you were exceptional. Perhaps that's why I was so afraid." Elena stood, indicating the meeting had concluded. "I wish you peace, William, genuinely. And Ainsworth Investments? Will likely fail in the coming weeks. Your choices have consequences, William. They always did." That evening, Elena and the triplets dined on their apartment terrace, Manhattan's skyline resplendent around them. They didn't mention William or the day's events. Instead, they discussed the Dubai expansion, the new simultaneous translation technology they were developing, college plans. "I'm proud of you," Elena said, raising her glass in a toast. "For who we are, for what we've built together." "For what you built, Mama," May corrected. "Alone, at the beginning." "Never truly alone," Elena responded, smiling at her children. "You were always my strength." Meanwhile, miles away, William Ainsworth gazed out the window of his increasingly empty Boston office, contemplating the empire Elena had built and the void his own choices had created. Not just the loss of a family, but an entire life built on misguided values. The following day, Elena Vasquez signed the contract for the acquisition of a small translation company in Boston, Vasquez International's first expansion into the city where everything had begun. The cycle was complete. The journey, not of revenge but of absolute triumph over adversity, finally reached its apex. On the rooftop of the building where she had once been desperate and abandoned, Elena now raised a glass to Boston's skyline, not as a woman defined by what she had lost, but celebrating everything she had conquered despite the obstacles. "We did it," she whispered to herself, free, at last, even from the shadows of the past. If you enjoyed today's video, I'm sure you'll love the next one. Don't waste time. Just click on the screen.